I'm Shailyn and I sew. Today's video is another beginner-friendly video where I go over 6 different types of pockets. Now that sounds like an awful lot for a beginner, but one of those pockets has 4 different variations, so really I'm going over 3 different types of pockets. The basic patch pocket, with all of its variations that make it not as basic. The paperbag pocket, which is what I like to call the patch pocket plus. And then finally, the inseam pocket, which is the pocket of all pockets. And obviously that's the one where you have a skirt or a dress that has a pocket on the inseam. Now this is a very lengthy video because I wanted to make sure that I had as much information as possible on each pocket style. So if there is a specific pocket that you are interested in, I will link down below the timestamp of every single pocket that I go over and all the different techniques that I go over as well. So let's begin. So the first pocket we're going to go over is the basic patch pocket. This is my pattern for the patch pocket that I'm going to show you all, but the shape can be different depending on the use of it. So you'll see patch pockets on the back of your jeans, on the front of men's dress shirts, and you can even add them to the front of your skirts if you want. Patch pockets are the easiest to do because basically you're taking your pattern piece with a little bit of seam allowance in the shape that you want. So if you want to go for something fancy like a heart, a flower, so on, then you can cut out that shape and then add seam allowance and do the same thing. So the first thing that you'll want to do with your patch pocket once you have it cut out is you want to fold the top over. And I have an inch for the top of the pocket, an inch seam allowance. Once you've done that, you're going to stitch at the very top. If you have fabric that frays a lot, you could also fold this over a little bit. Or if you have a serger, you can serge that edge down before you press. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this down. Now that you've done that, if you have curved corners like I do here, you're going to want to baste inside the seam allowance. So I have a half-inch seam allowance. I'm going to baste probably 1/4 of an inch at this edge, at this corner, and at this corner. And then I'm going to gather it a little bit to make it easier for when I press this inside. So right here you'll see that I have basted the rounded corners of the pocket, and I'm going to gather it. And what that does is it pulls the inside of the fabric and it makes it easier to make a perfect curve versus if I were to just fold it, I might end up pleating the fabric and end up with a sharp corner at the bottom of the pocket. So we're trying to avoid that by gathering. And you can double check your seam allowance here as well when you start pressing. And that is your patch pocket. So you're going to want to hand baste this. That way your seam allowance that you pressed will stay in place. So I'm just going to put this aside and I'm going to show you the other versions of the patch pockets before I show you how to put the patch pocket onto your item, your piece. If you have fabric that frays a lot, you're going to want to have lining. And so you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric of the same pattern, and you're going to just stitch this together. You'll want to leave an opening. I like to leave my opening on somewhere where it's straight, like right here. And what I'll do is I'll stitch from here, go up, over, down, and around, and then stop right here. So I'm going to have like 2 inches of an opening, and then I'm going to flip it right side out. Alright, so once that is stitched down, you can see that since I used the same pattern piece, I actually have a lot extra up here. So I'm going to cut that excess off actually. And then you'll also want to trim around the edges. Right at the bottom here where it curves, you have 2 options. You can notch it like so. So you're gonna cut little triangle pieces off so that when this gets turned to the inside, it won't bunch up, it'll end up having extra space. But what I like to do is I like to use a pinking shears. So I'll just pink around the whole pocket. So once you've trimmed that, you're going to go at that opening and you're going to flip it right side out. So once you've turned it right side out, you're going to want to take something kind of pokey but not too sharp. So I like to use my seam gauge, but I can't seem to find it right now. This is the closest thing I can find right now. Something that will be able to press or poke those edges out that's not too sharp, that'll poke through the fabric. Normally I use, like, my seam gauge has a little triangular part on it that makes it easier. You can also use chopsticks, that's my next go-to. Then once you're happy with that, you're gonna press it. Now the third variation is the self-lined patch pocket. It's called that because you're only using one piece of fabric instead of two pieces. So how you make the self-lined pattern is, what I did is I took my basic patch pocket pattern, I took out that top piece. This is the piece that I folded over on the basic patch pocket right here. So I took that out, and you're going to cut down here, and you're actually going to flip it, and you're going to cut up here. The easiest way I was able to do it was to cut on the fold. So this is my pattern piece right here. It was cut on the fold, so you can see right there. And that's your self-lined patch pocket. Now for this, you're going to do the same thing. You're actually just going to fold it over, and you're going to do the same thing that you did with the lined patch pocket right here. You're going to leave an opening. So you're going to stitch from up here down, stop, and then you're going to stitch from down here around the curves and all the way up. The only difference is that you have to stop because you don't really have to sew this part because it's already a fold, so you don't have to close that piece. So here is the self-lined patch pocket all stitched up. You're going to want to take your pinking shears if you have them and trim the seam allowance before you flip it right side out. And again, it will be the same process. You're going to want to take whatever tool you prefer, and you're going to want to push out those edges so it's nice and crisp before you press it. There you go. So that is the self-lined patch pocket compared to the lined patch pocket. As you can tell, because I use the same fabric, the only difference between these two is that there's a seam up here. And then compared to the unlined, the basic patch pocket. So if you're planning on doing a square pocket like so, you're going to have to do something on those corners. So for a square patch pocket, you're going to want to do the same process at the top. You're going to want to press that down. And there is another trick that I wanted to show you. If you don't want to see a stitch line right here, like on this patch pocket. So this is the right side of the fabric. I don't want to stitch this piece down. I want it to have a clean look. So what I do is I press it down this way. And I'm going to stitch down right here on both sides the seam allowance. So again, I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I'm going to stitch a 1/2 inch over and a 1/2 inch over, and I'm going to stop right there at the end. This is best done if you have already serged this edge. Now that you've stitched down those edges with it flipped towards the right side, you're going to trim right here, little triangles. Essentially taking off the excess so you get a nice little pointy part at the top there. And you're gonna flip it. Boop. And again, if you can't get it to point out, you're gonna use your tools to get that nice little crisp edge. So that is the method if you don't want a line of stitching at the top like on this one. And then now at this point, I can press this again the right way, which is towards the inside. Alright, so how do I do the rest of this pocket? How do I get a nice crisp corner right here? So the proper way to do corners like this is called the mitered corner. Basically what that looks like is it's gonna kind of fold in like that. You'll kind of recognize this on like picture frames. That is a mitered corner in carpentry, where it's a 45-degree angle. So the easiest method for me to get that nice 45-degree angle correctly is to press this side down, the seam allowance. So for me again, it's 1/2 inch. And then I open it up and I press the bottom. So once you've done that, you open it up. So you should see a nice little box or square at the bottom here. And that makes it easy for you to fold it up right to that little edge of the box. And that is your triangle. To tell if you've done it properly is you should be able to see that little crease here. That should line up with the crease here from pressing. So that's how you know that you've properly gotten that nice little corner up. And once I get it right, I like to immediately press it. And then you're gonna do the same thing on the other side. There is your squared patch pocket with the optional hem at the top where you can't see, there's no stitch line. How do you put them onto your piece of fabric? Take your piece of fabric, wherever your pocket is supposed to be, it should be marked. If you have drafted your own skirt or whatever you're putting it on, then hopefully you have an idea of where you want that pocket to be. And you're going to line it up. Alright, now that I have sewn the patch pockets down, I can show you all how to reinforce the corners here. So this first one is that regular basic patch pocket. Now I can take the basting out. And as you can see here, this is a regular backstitch. So I just backstitched here and I backstitched here. That's the easiest way to reinforce your pockets. So the next way is to do the regular backstitch at the top here. And then you can also do a zigzag stitch right here, right next to it. So the next way to reinforce your pockets is to do the zigzag stitch diagonally and then stitch around and then diagonally again. And then finally the last way, you'll see this on patch pockets on menswear usually, on like the men's dress shirts. You're going to create a triangle. So you're going to start here at this little corner where I started, backstitch, go towards the top of the pocket, and then towards the edge of the pocket, and then follow your pocket as normal. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side. So what happens if you need a little bit more space in your pocket? You still want to have a patch pocket type pocket, as in something that you add on later, but this patch pocket is much too small for the purpose that you want. You need like a little bit more space. What you can do is make what's called a paperbag pocket. The paperbag pocket adds an element to the patch pocket. So for your paperbag pocket, you'll need to cut a strip of fabric that is long enough to go all the way around your pocket. And then to determine how wide you want that strip of fabric to be is how much extra space you want. You're going to start again with the pocket. So now that I have pressed that over and stitched it down, that's the wrong side, this is the right side. I'm going to press this down as well, and I'm going to do 2 folds because I am not serging this. And you can clip or pin all the way around to the edge. Now for me, I had a little bit of excess here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all the way but probably up until here. I like to have excess just in case I measured it wrong. So now I'm going to trim this piece. And press it down. Alright, so this is what your paper bag pocket looks like. This is the right side. It's going to end up looking like this once you flip it over. But before we do that, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to trim this. If you have a serger, again, you can use your serger. You can also use your trusty dusty pinking shears. So I have serged the edges down, and now I need to press this down. If you've already serged this, you can just press it down 1 time. But because I haven't, I'm going to have to press it down twice to keep that edge inside, that raw edge inside. Alright, once you've pressed the gussets in, what I like to do is I like to actually match that seam up of the main pocket to the edge of the gusset and press it down. And the reason for this is when you sew this pocket onto your article of clothing, you're not going to sew it down like this because then you're not going to get that nice extra depth in the pocket. You're going to sew it down as wide and as tall as that main pocket. So it's going to look like this when it's sewn down. You know, obviously a little bit nicer. So what I like to do is I like to press that little pleat. Usually that's done at the end, but I like to do that now just so I can visually see what the pocket looks like, and I can align it to the markings on the fabric. Now that you've pressed it, it looks like a patch pocket, but you know that you have all of those extra layers there. I've clipped it in place for now, but what you'll end up doing is you'll end up slowly pinning just the gusset onto the fabric. Remember, this is just a way for you to visually see where the pocket's supposed to go. That way the depth is exactly 90 degrees straight. You're not going to accidentally sew it too far over or too far in, and then you'll have like extra gaping. This is just my way of making sure that everything is perfect. So what I like to do is I like to unclip, and I will slowly fold this over and pin just the gusset in place, like so. Now that that's pinned in place, you're going to stitch as close to the edge of the gusset as you can, all the way around here, making sure you don't get the outside of the pocket, just the inside, like so. Now that you've stitched the gusset in place, and since you've already pressed down the pocket like so, the only thing, what you can do is you can leave it like this, or you can also press down these top corners. That way the top corner doesn't open up, but the rest of the pocket does. So if you want to do that, you can do the same thing that you've done with any of these pockets. You can just do a regular straight stitch and backstitch. You can do a zigzag stitch, or you can do a variation of these triangles. So what this does right here is it reinforces the top corners of the pocket like all the other examples, but it also keeps the top flap closed while allowing you to still put stuff into that pocket. So I'm going to put my phone in here, and there is a lot of space for extra stuff. So right here, the phone goes in there, and you can tell that it kind of pulls the material out, and that's kind of all I can add in there. But if I put my phone in here, I could put another phone in here because I've added that gusset. But because that top part is stitched down, it closes it off a little bit at the top. This last pocket that I'm going to show you is the Inseam Pocket. It is called an inseam pocket because the pocket will be inside the seam. So I have already cut these. This is an example. Not sure why it doesn't line up. I've already cut this as an example. This is going to be where my seam goes, and this is going to be, let's say, the side of your skirt. Normally you would just sew down the seams and you'll have a nice little skirt, but if you want to add an inseam pocket, you're going to have to add the pockets in before you sew that seam down. This is a small version of one of the pocket patterns that I have for an inseam pocket. The reason it is shaped this way is because you want extra space for that seam, which is why it comes in a little bit more. And then obviously you'll want a little round bit right here for your items to go in. If your pocket just went in, say, like an oval like this, there's a chance that your stuff will fall out of your pocket. So you want that dip in your pocket when you're creating your inseam pocket pattern. So what you need to do with your inseam pocket is you need 2 of them, and you will need to sew 1 on each side. For the video, I'm going to mark these again so you can see which side is the right side. So this is your skirt. You would normally sew the seam down, right sides together, and you'll open it up and you'll have a seam right here. If you want the pocket right here, you're going to take your 2 right side pieces. I like to do the pockets at the same time. That way the pockets are at the same level. So you're going to take the right side of your pocket and you're going to flip it over, and you need your pocket to be right side to right side, just like you normally sew. And the reason I said I like to do them at the same time when I pin them is because when you sew your seams together, if I sewed them separately and I mismeasured it, I could be a little bit off in where I put my pockets. So I like to line them up and make sure that the pockets are at exactly the same level. I don't want anything like this where it's offset. I'm going to pull that down a little bit and line it up. Now, when you stitch this together, you're going to stitch inside the seam allowance. So if your pattern has a 5/8 seam allowance, I usually stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you've stitched down your pockets, you're going to open them and press the seam. Now that your pockets are pressed open, you're going to take right sides together. Make sure they line up. And you're going to stitch your seam allowance. You're going to go down, you're going to stop, leaving an opening in your pocket, stitch all the way around your pocket, and then down your side seam. Alright, so this is what it looks like now. As you can see, I've sewn the pockets on the inside of this seam, so there is a little bit of a gap there. And the reason I do that is because when you press this open, you're always pressing, remember, you're always pressing your seams. So once you've pressed that seam open, you can see that there is an opening here, but let's say you ran out of fabric or you're using a different color for the pocket, like a lining material and that sort of thing, and you don't want to see it, That's why you put that pocket inside the seam allowance. That way you don't see it potentially gaping. If you're wearing it, it might gape open a little bit. You won't see it that much. And that is the difference of just having an 1/8 inch inside that seam allowance. And that is the last pocket in this video. This is the Inseam Pocket again. This is the most popular pocket that's used on circle skirts, gathered skirts, and all of the skirts and dresses where people go, oh my god, I have pockets. So this is the one that you'll probably learn and use the most. Unless you want a visible pocket, then of course you can use that patch pocket that I showed in the beginning of the video. Thank you all for watching my video. If you made it all the way to the end, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask down below in the comments, and happy sewing!